Lionel, is that you?
There, I think I got it.
Oh, what? Oh, I'm not allowed to talk. Okay.
Oh, there you go. No, what were you gonna? You were gonna ask Bruce a question.
I was.
Go for it.
He pushed the button, by the way. That's what
pushed the button.
Oh, to record.
Yeah,
okay,
we're now.
live,
Have you ever been on a podcast, Tom?
I don't know what these things are.
Is it the first time for you?
Something like that.
Do you get nervous in front of millions of people?
I don't know. I just wanted to ask Bruce because he's a World War I aficionado.
You can. You're being part of this. Is part of the bit. This is.
You know something. You know what we have here, Lionel.
What's that?
What we have here, Lionel, is a case of the dueling hosts.
The dueling hosts. Oh, look at that! I'm liking that. All right, I'll be quiet and you ask your question, Tom.
2 World War I films that I've seen recently: 1917 and Journey's End. Have you seen both of these films?
I have seen neither of them. My son saw 1917 and said I would probably enjoy it. So I'll track it down at some point. And Journey's End I wasn't familiar with.
Journey's End is based on a play from 1932, but it's about the First World War. I think they're both exceptional films and worth watching for completely different reasons. So as a World War I aficionado, I had to pass that on to you.
Well, actually, 1917, my son saw it and said it was very good. I'd enjoy it. And then, so I'll have to look up both of those.
Journey's End.
Wasn't 1917 just released recently?
No, it was released, about 6 months ago, maybe a year. Yeah.
Sort of just before all the COVID.
So that's that would be recently.
Yeah.
And how long ago was the other one released?
A couple of years prior to that, but I wasn't aware of it until I found it through some streaming service, and then I thought, oh, this is interesting.
When do you have time to watch movies?
Very rarely, but when I do, I enjoy them, or I try to at least, and then I try to pass on the enjoyment to others.
Oh, okay. I turn my camera off. See, we turn our cameras off here, Tom, because we like to pretend we're like on Model Rail Radio.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah, he was thinking this would be a regular Skype call, but no.
Exactly. So we use this thing called Whereby.com, which is something we discovered. I think didn't we discover it, Bruce, through those Model Railroad YouTube Builder Live?
Yes, those guys are using it.
Our buddy,
and we were having all sorts of issues with Skype, and it wasn't working. And then
we
got onto this.
Yeah,
good to know.
And this is simply all you do is send the person the link. And they click on the link, and boom, they're there. They don't have to download a program. They don't have to they don't have to get an account. They blah 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 blah. And you know me, Tom. You must know me well enough by now that I don't really like details. So whatever I can do to make my life simpler is what I do. You look like Tom. Soon you're gonna have to turn on your camera because you look like you're worn out.
It's been interesting. This new normal is just, it affects people differently, right?
Yeah, and how's it affect?
My eyes are normally small and beady anyway. You just don't normally get to see them. My perspective is, my wife can tell you, I have amazing eyes when I finally open them, but most of the time they're just small and beady.
And beady.
Yeah.
Little gecko eyes.
I'll try to open them more.
All right. So, or you can turn your camera off, and then we don't have to look at you.
Yeah, that would work too.
Yeah, then I won't irritate you. See, then I won't irritate
Very
you.
Good.
Now it's just like being on Model Rail Radio.
It is, exactly.
The premier podcast of all model railroading podcasts.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Lionel.
Do you think you were the first one to start?
No, I'm on the shoulders of giants. Dave Frary and what were the fellows' names? They had a New England Structure Kit cast, and they did that first, and then obviously the late Ryan Anderson had Model Railcast Show, and then we came along, and then there were a bunch of them. Trevor, up in your part of the world, did, what was it called, the Model Railway Show?
Yes, Trevor he did quite a number of those.
But he came after you, didn't he?
No, he did. And then there were what's the fellow's name? Tom Comboy had a podcast for a short period of time. There was an N-scaler who did like a video cast, like way back in the day. oh, there were a bunch of people, but there weren't enough. I think that was the problem.
Well,
I always thought that there needed to be more.
Well, and I think the problem is all podcasts that came after Model Rail Radio seem pale in comparison.
I wouldn't necessarily say that was the case. I think the sister podcast to Model Rail Radio, the AML Network, remains strong. Yeah. I certainly represent you folk when I have an opportunity to.
Yeah, but I must admit, yours podcast, Tom, is certainly unique in that it's, as you call it, like the only live model railway call-in show, which
this format hasn't been stolen. I mean, I would love to see others do exactly the same format and take the burden off me.
Well,
but yeah, I mean, look, if it weren't for live, Bruce you would have never called in, and Lionel would have never called in.
I got it because Clark Kooning got me into it, and then I liked it and harassed Lionel long enough to get in there, and the rest is history.
And I don't think I've ever told you the truth. So. I don't think I've ever told you the real. This is a good story because we're talking to the man himself. So Bruce kept saying to me, "You got to come on this podcast. You got to come on this podcast." And I kept saying to him, no, I don't want to go on the podcast because I was in Model Railroader, and if I go on, they're going to all of a sudden go, so tell us the secret of the universe for model railroading. So I kept pushing off because I wasn't in the mood.
I think we'd already had Marty McGurk on. We'd already harassed Marty McGurk sufficiently by the time you came on. Yes. So he probably got the brunt of it.
So basically, I'm full of myself.
Sorry, continue the story.
No, never mind. How many years have you been doing this?
About, I don't know, 11 or 12. Maybe more than that. I don't know. It feels like maybe 11 or 12 years, something like that.
How many?
I mean, in podcasting, I've been doing it since 2006, I think.
How many shows you done now, Tom?
We're in the low 90s, 190.
Okay, so you almost.
So we've got a bunch of other ones. Yeah.
You're almost up to 200.
Nearly reaching show 200. I think we're going to do 12 hours for show 200.
Holy mackerel.
We're just going to leave the mics on. We did 10 and a half hours for one of them. I think the show 150 was maybe 6.5, 7 hours, but I think show 100 was officially 10 and a half hours.
Yeah, we had the
you guys called it.
We had the studio down in Credit Valley Railway in Mississauga. There was Chris Abbott was there. Brian. I'm gapping up. Brian Schilling was there, and there's I think I'm not sure Clark was there or not. Clark maybe they're part of it, but they had we had a fair number of people in and out during the day down there.
Did you go down for that, Bruce?
I did.
Well, that's cool. That's a cool idea. I don't know if I could do live. I could try it, but I get agitated too easy by bad sound or something, and I'd be like. I'm basically the agitated Model Railroad podcast. So, okay.
I still see Chris Abbott.
Do you?
And he and I, we do a podcast together called My Rules Are Better. And it's a gaming, role-playing, wargaming, skirmish gaming kind of podcast. And it's just wonderful to still spend time with Chris Abbott.
Well,
He's just
cool.
a salt-of-the-earth person. So,
See, I've always thought you and I should do a podcast because it would just be endless arguing. You would have
to do that.
Yeah.
Can we start with JFK? I want to start with JFK.
JFK.
The airport or the president?
Let's start with JFK.
Yeah.
Not the president, because I find this absolutely fascinating. I find Lionel's story associated with JFK absolutely fascinating. But then I would have to argue with him.
What's my story about that? I think there's only the one shooter? Is that what you mean?
No, I think the effect that it had on your life was...
Absolutely. Absolutely. It had a huge effect on my life. It was, I think I was in I was 9 years old, so...
Probably grade 4 or 5?
I'm thinking 3, 4, or 5. Mm. And I remember sitting in the classroom in our public school, and it wasn't that long after the cop had stopped me for running a stop sign, actually. It might have been that year. So... we were sitting in the classroom, and over the loudspeaker, the principal of the school comes over the loudspeaker around 2:30 in the afternoon and makes an announcement that President Kennedy had been assassinated. And years later, when I would think back on that, I would think to myself, I don't know if that was really the right thing to be doing in an elementary school.
Same thing happened in our school. The principal came on with the first announcement he'd been shot, and then a few minutes later that he had died. And
do you really want to be telling a bunch of grade 4s that the president of the free world has been killed. I mean, I don't know if that's really the way you want to go.
Yeah.
So okay, so that's what do you want to argue about? About my feelings?
I'm not about my feelings. That's a good way to start out. Yeah, let's go for the feelings. Yeah, let's start out with that. I just find, I mean, I guess I've always had my parents were relatively nihilistic. So, I mean, obviously I found out about JFK's death after the fact in some regard. But I was always introduced to him associated with his father. And basically, like, Joe Kennedy, the bootlegger, then the friend of the, various kinds of interesting gentlemen. And I guess I was reading recently, I Heard You Paint Houses, which is about The Irishman, which was a film that came out on Netflix. And the whole discussion associated with, obviously, Joe Kennedy and then JFK and, how they farmed to get the guns and move the guns and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, it always struck me that JFK was just in a kind of curious part, but it happened to you in real time as a child, which I think is really where the interesting distinction kind of is. Because for me, it was always told to me after the fact that JFK was never, I don't know, he just never had the kind of heroic status in my nihilistic part of Australia that he certainly had here. And it's interesting actually talking to my wife, because my wife is from the US, and it's actually born, I think, on the day he was assassinated. Well, not the day he was assassinated, but the day he was assassinated, but not the same year. And it's always interesting how the whole JFK, and also, subsequently his children, the myth, all the various components to JFK have kind of fit together. But I remember talking to you once, and you talked about how this was like a defining moment in your life.
Oh, for sure.
And it made like really strong. And I guess I was raised, I mean, the heroes I had, the technical heroes, this is quite ironic actually, because one of them called me up and started screaming to me over the phone today. But the heroes I had, I met by the time I was about 18. I went out and found these kind of, well, not 18 actually, probably my early 20s, found the technologists. Many of them I had to come over here to the US in order to meet. So my whole relationship with heroes is perhaps slightly different, but I always found it fascinating, this notion of the pinnacle of JFK as you describe, and the pinnacle of him being assassinated. I guess I felt the same way about John Lennon, and I was actually in the UK when John Lennon was assassinated, and I think that was a similar or killed. And it's only recently I've been to New York many times, but I only recently went to the Dakota Building, and I can't listen to John Lennon's music anymore. I used to listen to John Lennon's music regularly, like multiple times per week. And having been to the Dakota Building, it really impacted me. So maybe John Lennon is my JFK experience and living through that actually. So yeah, I think we've explored my trauma more than we've explored your trauma in this conversation, Lionel. But it's a fascinating. Now, I've always been fascinated by people who just talk about these kind of life turning points. And certainly when you talked about the JFK assassination, it just struck me as this is a really fascinating thing about Lionel. And we need to explore it some later date.
Well, we do, and we can argue about it. Okay, here's another interesting turning point because it's a model railroad podcast. When was it? October 96 or 69, was it not, Bruce? The centerfold of the
centerfold was October 1967 model railroad. John Allen's old-time train on the high truss bridge.
I can remember laying on my living room floor, looking at that. I wore the pages out, going back and forth, looking at that article. Like, that was a defining moment for me in model railroading, because like once I saw that article in the October 67 issue, which I guess I'm probably reading it in September 67, but once I saw that article, it was like, man, this is just the coolest thing going. So what's a defining moment for you in model railroading?
There have been a few. I think seeing Bernie Kopinski's layout and also seeing Dave Ramos's layout, they were two defining moments. I'm trying to think, some other layouts that I've seen, I've kind of thought, I mean, Bruce Chubb's is just really, like, Bruce Chubb's layout is like some kind of psychological, it's like some kind of 19th century Gothic horror, like, inspiration of model railroad. It really is very curious. So yeah, Bruce Chubb's layout probably as well really struck me as like, this is a layout of someone who needs to be studied on some really fundamental level. And yeah, so probably Bruce Chubb's layout. I'm trying to think. my mind's gone blank on some of the others, but yeah, probably Bruce Chubb's layout, Dave Ramos, and definitely Bernie Kopinski's layout. And I was really actually, when I was on Dave Ramos's layout, I was rather jet lagged, and I was there with Ron Kleiss.
Okay.
And I'd seen that layout so many different ways. I mean, he does a lot of video presentation. A lot of people that visit his layout to video presentation. It's brilliant. I mean, it's not amazingly scenic. I mean, it's not a layout of outstanding, but in terms of operation, in terms of just the passion this man has put into his basement in New Jersey, I think that's a pretty impressive thing to see. But yeah, I don't know. Those kind of experiences, I think.
We recently interviewed Dave Ramos with our buddy Kaylee Zhang, and she organized that. And Dave is just like so enthusiastic about the hobby and the people in it. And then at the end, he yelled at me in Spanish, which was kind of cool. Mm. But like Dave is, you're right. It's not necessarily a particularly scenic or finished layout by some standards. However, his enthusiasm for operations and being in the hobby far outweighs anything else. I mean, you can't help but be infectious about the hobby when you're standing around Dave Ramos.
On a different day, I went to Craig Biscay's layout as well, and I helped him tidy up his layout. And that was actually that, in terms of like intimacy in the hobby, that's probably one of the most intimate experiences I've had in the hobby, was tidying Craig Biscay's layout. I bought him breakfast first. We went back to his place, and I tidied his layout with him. And I don't know anyone, I mean, look, most people won't even hand me a throttle when I come to their layout, but to actually get me to tidy your layout, yeah. So that was also, but I think, to be fair, meeting people, talking, I mean, Bruce Kelly, every time I see Bruce Kelly, we spend 5-6 hours just talking. Amazing friendships in this hobby, just amazing friendships. So yeah, magazine articles and things like that, yeah, they're interesting. I mean, look, seeing Jim Gore's layout in a magazine article was pretty interesting, but vastly more about meeting people and just talking to people and seeing, they represent the hobby, but they have so many other interests and experiences. I mean, very much what your podcast is about, Lionel, is about basically understanding the humanity of the hobby as much as the, soldering, wires to rail and this kind of stuff. And I think that's what's really the quality of the people I've met through doing model rail radio is just absolutely untouchable. Yeah,
that's the best thing. I mean, actually one of the things that surprises me about doing the podcast. There's these guys called in the School of Podcasting. They do some podcast review show. Mm-hmm. And 2.5 years ago, they reviewed my podcast, and then they asked me if they could do a "Where Are They Now" thing. And one of the things that floored me was, he says, "So you've been doing your podcast for 6 years?" And I went, "Yeah." He says that's a lot. That's centuries in podcasting. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, most people quit." Like, that's the one thing about your podcast that I find not fascinating. What's the word? Invigorating, maybe, is the fact that you stuck with it all this time.
Mm. I don't think I could. Well, model rail radio is really, really, really important to me. Like, it's hard to actually describe this to people, particularly people that I just meet socially. This is a responsibility more than anything. It's a responsibility for a group of people who truly love the hobby, love the format, love talking about it, but moreover, that have made lifelong friendships through doing this thing. And I think that's a responsibility. That's not something that I, would shirk. I mean, I have my bad days, I have my good days, but model rail radio for me, it's rare that I get off the podcast and don't feel a real buzz from having talked to people, from having explored stuff. And I have so many friends through this thing that it really is a social, and particularly, through the new normal, which we may or may not talk about. But the new normal, without doing the podcast, I would be very nihilistic and twisted now. I really need the podcast in order to, remind me of so many of the people that I've, met, and, new people as well that are calling in. So I think it's critical.
Yeah, and particularly this time, as you mentioned, the thing going on, it's a way to connect with others and unwind and forget about things for an hour and a half or whatever the time is.
Bruce always gets mad at me lately because I'm too long with the introduction. And it's because I like talking to the people. We have a semi-regular...
But then again, that's why we only get through like 3 days of...
Yeah, exactly. Really, I should never have started this pod. Thanks to you, Tom. You basically ruined my life.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
I was going to say something. Don't tell me. Oh, yeah. When you were speaking of the new normal, were you speaking of the fact that Gordie Robinson, a 32-year-old from the North Atlantic off the coast of Scotland, is running for president, and the NMRA board is doing everything and anything they can to stop him? Is that what you were talking about?
You know what? I think, and I've said this publicly, I'll say it publicly again. He needs to start collecting NMRA dues. People need to start sending him their NMRA dues and then see what the NMRA board has to say about that. Because quite frankly, I think Gordie's a powerhouse, and the way that he's being abused currently is just despicable. And quite frankly, I think he should be collecting money. I think he should be creating a rebel NMRA organization. And basically, I'm with him 100%. In fact, I think he's one of these salt-of-the-earth people that is way too forgiving for the kinds of nonsense that he sees. I think people should be sending him money. I think he should create a separate organization and let the NMRA just work out what they're going to do. You know, they can get their Nerf bats and whack each other on the head. Because quite frankly, yeah, I think this thing is really... And normally, look, I've been quiet about the NMRA for years. But what has happened to Gordie is just really made... And look, Clark Cooning disappeared from a recent show I was recording because it got to, against something that you could probably kill back into. So I think this whole thing is very curious. But more power to Gordie. I wish he'd get a bit more, a bit more like you, Lionel, associated with like fully understanding the bleakness that he's signing himself up for if he continues to pursue this thing. Because, yeah, look, my view is he needs to create a new organization and the rest of us can join him with it.
Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
I was just going to ask Tom, did you watch the round table?
Oh my goodness! So here's what happened. So I didn't watch it initially. I didn't watch it initially.
My question.
And then Lionel called in and restated a whole series of facts that Gordie had stated. And I thought, well, I've got to at least listen to this thing to work out which way I have to edit this podcast. Because Gordie says one thing, Lionel says something else. Clearly, I'm wrong by backing one of them at some stage. So I thought, okay, well, I've better watch this thing. Look, Jim Gore is a salt-of-the-earth person. I don't know how on earth he got himself involved with these people. And I think genuinely, individually, they're probably relatively nice guys. But collectively, their whole mindset is just really very curious. And look, I felt this I did this 12 years ago in a Vegas casino. I had the NMRA board, and they were curious then, and they're curious now. And my perspective on this thing is Gordie has made me, in answer to your question, Lionel, Gordie has made me say publicly what I felt privately for a long period of time. Because I just can't stand to see someone as vibrant, intelligent, and passionate as Gordie get knocked down by these people that clearly just don't understand what he's doing or what any of us are doing, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing, I watched it from. Sorry, I was pulling my hair out after the first 10 minutes. But of the ones on there, my personal opinion is Jim Gore, great guy, doing what he wants, and Frank Koch, or Koch, or Koch, I guess he was
Koch, yeah.
Koch. The other ones, they just seem to be somewhat taking umbrage to the fact that people were asking them questions and trying to get answers to what they're thinking. And I hear you can make a drinking game, watch it again, make a drinking game, and the number of times Peter Magoon said 501c member driven and whatever the other one.
Which you pointed out. You took hats off to you, Bruce. Here, you took exception to that. You actually read the documentation, went back to them, and said, "Actually, you're wrong."
Yeah,
right.
Because they claimed there wasn't in their mandate to grow the hobby. Now, the wording in the document is advance the hobby. So, in my mind, grow, advance. Yeah, they're probably the same thing. But advance the hobby in any means possible. Blah 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 blah. But that's right in their own document, and they're just signing it. No, it's not up to us to grow the hobby. We don't need to chase the beginners because Model Railroad does that. And we don't want anybody under 45. So,
there's a big word that I use periodically here, which is xenophobic. And that, quite frankly, is my experience in the majority of dealing with the NMRA. And quite frankly, you can look up what xenophobic means if you don't know what it means. But it's a waste of my time. And whenever I interact and have these experiences, I just think to myself, my experience doing model rail radio is the antithesis of the way this organization is behaving.
Yeah. Now, Lionel and I had a bit of a conversation in my office this afternoon, is that I think in general, the NMRA, if you're at the divisional and regional levels, they're doing great things, and there's a great bunch of people there. But somehow
depends on the regions and the divisions.
Yes, okay, but somehow the national is kind of lost touch of what's going on everywhere else.
Well,
I think the worst aspects of these bad regions and bad divisions have polluted the national. Because I used to be, the president used to also cohabit my part of the world, and my view is that he represented everything that I thought was curious in the organization perfectly, and also represented that in my area. So, yeah.
Well, in Australia, the NMRA flourishes thanks to folks like Martin Jenkins. I mean, it absolutely flourishes in Australia.
Believe me. Yeah.
And I think it's really, really important to go back to what Bruce touched on. And I also, my friend Ken Ziska there in Minneapolis, he has pointed this out, and it's really important for people like Ken on their behalf to point out that while, yes, there are some regions or divisions that don't work very well, there are a lot of people at the grassroots level of the NMRA that are trying as hard as they can to make this a really good organization. And I think we need to be careful. My beef is with the board of directors and the way that, and the responsibility that they have to run this organization properly, and they don't. They've turned into some sort of old boys club. And if you don't want to know what that's like, just look at the way they've treated Gordy, who's a young guy, 32 years old, full of enthusiasm. They're doing everything they can to keep him from even just putting his name in the ballot box. He wants to run for president, and it's like there's no harm in him running for president. It doesn't hurt anybody, so. Why try to keep them out of the ballot box?
Yeah, but I'll throw something on that. They keep referring to petitions and things like that, and all the procedures are in the executive handbook. Well, they talk about for a petition you need so many people, signatures, stuff like that. They haven't come to grips with the fact that this is the modern age. People can do a petition online, and nobody's really signing things. So. To be fair to them, I can see, yes, they want to get an email address to check back and see, is this person actually legit? That I can't blame for. But then that's something they'll also have to address going forward is the acceptance and the format to submit an electronic petition. So, in the future, I'd say, okay, you get the petition, you need X number of people, so many in the region. But those signing, you have to give their name, region, membership number, and an email address, and then that solves the problem nicely. So it's kind of they weren't really sure how to handle it, and I can understand why they want to make sure that the people are legit because they don't have a signature, and I don't know how they would have done vetting signatures against names in the past. You've got the information, membership number, name, and region type thing, and then a signature. But I can see why they might want to do that and are doing that just to make sure that everybody who is signing the petition is legit.
Absolutely. For sure. And if they had explained that to him right out of the box, there would have been no problem.
Can I be an advocate? Can I be the devil's advocate here?
Sure.
My view is that if you had someone with the energy of Gordy, who has put in hundreds, as you well know, hundreds of hours just in the past 3 months to get the hobby out, to grow the YouTube channel, to do a wide variety of things in the hobby, to get more eyes. The way in which you comport yourself when dealing with this individual should be distinctly different than the way that they have done it. And I think what they're doing is ignoring the skill, the brilliance, and the energy that Gordy has brought to this thing. And my view is that there are ways in which you can communicate as an organization to an individual, and the way in which they've done this, irrespective of the bureaucracy. Because, look, when I spent however long I spent in Mahwah, New Jersey, trying to prove that I was speaking or giving a clinic at the convention that I, attended there, no one was giving me any degree of existential respect, right? Gordy demands, through his behavior and work, a degree of existential respect that I don't think he was afforded in the communication that he received. And what it shows is a level of disrespect for someone who has done more for the hobby than the board has done collectively in an incredibly small period of time. So I think while it's true, you could behave with a certain degree of bureaucratic rigor. The way in which they behaved was a blunder on every possible way. Because if you're not even trying to grow the membership, okay, if you just want the membership to be static, you want it to be a club of men of a certain age, of a particular ethnicity, of a particular, from a particular area, all these kind of things which fit into this, then that's fine. But that's not the nature of the modern world. And that's certainly not the nature of the energy and the passion that Gordy brings. And quite frankly, I think the communication that they've given to Gordy to date, I find personally incredibly offensive and incredibly stupid.
Good for you. That's really well put, because I think let's talk for a lot of people that may not be aware. Gordy has started something called the NMRAX, because the NMRA YouTube channel was doing nothing, and this started in May, and feel free, or April, feel free, Bruce, to correct me on the details, and or Tom. And let's not forget that Gordy worked with 3 other fellas: Martin Jenkins from Australia, a fellow named Brad Anderson from Australia, and a fellow named Speed Muller, who lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And these 4 guys have worked tirelessly, absolutely tirelessly, to create something on the NMRA YouTube channel that, like you say, Tom, has never in the history of the hobby been present, ever. Like, he created something that never happened ever.
Yeah, and particularly when he, coming out of the box with the first one, 24 hours.
Yeah, well,
that was impressive enough. And then others, and then following up, St. Louis is canceled. Here we go. We're going to have 3 streams going. We're going to have all sorts of things to check out.
And it's not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, it's something that Gordy did. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Not necessarily everybody. Some people that did one clinic aren't necessarily that excited about being involved again. But the point is, what Gordy's done is he's opened a new avenue. He's opened a new way for the hobby to, like, somehow or other, we have to convey to the NMRA board that this is now a worldwide hobby. Like you said, Tom, I mean, it's like I said to you on your show, which I'm assuming, do you send me a check, or do you put it in PayPal?
Bitcoin, strictly Bitcoin.
Oh, okay. But let's not, what Gordy has done is spectacular. But the reason I wanted to have you on again is I've decided, and I feel like there was a stretch there when I didn't pay you enough respect for what you did. And you're right. There are a couple of podcasts that went ahead of you, but I think, Bruce, either agree or disagree, whatever you think is the truth. I feel like I've always said that had it not been for Model Rail Radio, this podcast wouldn't even exist. And, that's something that you've created, Tom. That's why I want to give you your due and have you on, and hear what you have to say, because you deserve, because there's a lot of people like yourself and Gordy that have created things that have never happened in the hobby ever before.
Yeah, and I'll just throw something in here, Lana. I remember when you were doing your first couple, you were having some issues with the recording and sound quality, and Tom graciously worked through with you to get those situations resolved and improve everything.
That's right. That's exactly right. I wanted to touch on that, Bruce. Now, I'm sorry, Tom, there won't be any more time for you to talk because it's mostly me and Bruce.
Very good.
But you're right.
I wanted to say something here. If I may, because I think when I talk to Gordy when he calls into Model Rail Radio, and also there has been a conversation that's been ongoing in Model Rail Radio associated with bringing the joy back into the hobby. Now, through the new normal, which is the lockdown period for folks listening in 10, 15 years, a number of hobbies have done a number of different things. We are not unique in model railroading. There are a bunch of hobbies that require conventions and get-togethers, and that has a social aspect to it, that are all suffering through this period. What fascinates me is that collectively, and I've been talking about this kind of technology for a long period of time, but Gordy has distilled this in the hobby currently. Now, I think there are many different ways of doing what Gordy does. I would really dearly, which is one of the reasons I'm a strong advocate to sending Gordy money, is I think with a little bit of money, which the NMRA could also provide, maybe, Gordy could change what he's doing and make it remarkable. Like, absolutely. It's outstanding already. But I think the lack of infrastructure that he has, which is relatively small in delta changes, would significantly change a lot of what he does. I also think that there's an element that's missing in a lot of these formats, which is the formality that the NMRA has historically had in their clinics. The formality in all these things, which I think actually, when I did NMRAX, I would much rather have done it in more interactive. I mean, when I go and give clinics, for example, I do it very interactively. I make sure that there's kind of question and answer, there's constant discussion, I make eye contact with people, there's all that kind of stuff. And I think the format that NMRAX has currently is being stifled by the history of the NMRA. And I think there are lots of different things that Gordy could expand into. And I'd certainly talk to him about it, and it's part of a broad discussion. There are many hobbies that are all doing this kind of stuff currently. And they all have different... My wife is a quilter. When her quilting... and these are like 80 quilters get together and work on various projects. And they're always talking about things other than quilting. Like, they always break out and they have discussions. And because, the video, people show, oh, I've got a vintage car in my house. And, there's all this kind of strange discussion. I think there's a lot more room for that in the hobby as well. I think particularly in some other hobbies, I've seen the way that clinics are done be more interactive. I think phones and using phones as well as laptops together. But again, this is a technical thing. These are technical nuances that we need to grow into. The difficulty is that without a series, it's like with Model Rail Radio. What I want is a series of podcasts. I want AML. I want other people forming podcasts. Ideally, the NMRA at a regional level, they should all have regional podcasts and this kind of stuff. But I think the problem that Model Rail Radio has had is the conservatism is not the right term. Xenophobia I prefer to use, but let's say conservatism in some regard has eliminated the ability for there to be tens of Gordies out there all exploring this technology together. So, I mean, the seed of Model Rail Radio is let's create as many podcasts as possible. Let's not just have one podcast. So, as you say, Lionel, when you had audio issues, when you had problems early on, I gave you help. I've given help to recently Jim Lincoln. I gave a lot of help to Tim Harrison after Ryan Anderson's passing. I think that's the important thing about this technology is, and you do things with AML very differently than the way I do things with Model Rail Radio. And that is all choice and nuance and you bringing your own personality and all these things. So, yeah, I'd like to see more Gordies out there. And I'd like to see the NMRA dominance here necessarily just become a thing where, it's not a discussion about the NMRA. It's a discussion about how to get more joy through interactive content in the hobby.
I have a question for you. Are you taking questions?
I'll take questions.
All right, that's good. I think this hobby is way bigger than anybody realizes.
Without question.
Yeah, and like
you've shown that. You've shown that personally, directly. AML has shown that this hobby is bigger than the group that I collected with Model Rail Radio, and no doubt in the future there'll be other podcasts that will show, because there are so many lone wolf modelers out there that are doing amazing work that you never get to hear about. And it takes podcasts like yours, like mine, to bring these people out of the darkness and into people, seeing their work. I was
researching railroads around Bloomingdale, Ohio, for a friend, mm-hmm. and I stumbled onto. What's that?
As you do.
Yeah.
As one does.
As one does. Exactly. And I stumbled onto this Facebook page about this dad and his son that are building this absolutely spectacular layout and I'm looking at the photos and I'm thinking this room looks huge. So finally I send a message to them and it's in a 50 by 70 foot room above a garage that they have, and it's absolutely massive. And they've got like 170 people on their Facebook page. And I said, I sent a message. I said, hey, would you be on my podcast? Because this thing's fantabulous. And I'm constantly stumbling across these things where these kind of like people that are lost in the crowd. And it's like absolutely fabulous. And I'm thinking, my God, this hobby is just massive that nobody, I think Al Gore is specifically invented the internet for model railroading. because Al Gore is a closet model railroader. Must be.
Maybe not be a closet model railroader. You never know.
Well, that's true.
We've never asked him.
That's true. We should do that.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw another question out to Tom, and he touched on this a little bit earlier with one of his comments. You're talking about gamers, and I know there's the role-playing gamers, but there's also a wide range of people who play war games and that type of thing. And it constantly surprises me the number of those people who are also model railroaders, and there seems to be a great crossover between the two. And you look at some of these guys who are painting Warhammer figures and things like that, and they're just doing outstanding work doing that. And and then that will flip over to the model railroading, or I don't know the attraction between war games and model railroading. I've got a bunch of war games and interests. Is it the strategy and figuring out? I don't know, but it's just kind of an interesting connection. There seems to be such a crossover between those two hobbies.
I found it. It's hang on, just before you go on. It's the Columbus and Ohio River Model Railroad. Just I say to everybody, go to this Facebook page, the Columbus and Ohio River Model Railroad, and it's these guys are building this fantastic model railroad, just absolutely fantastic. Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted you, so go ahead. That's not very good podcasting, is it, Tom? Where I just interrupt people.
You could edit this together. I'm sure you could. Well, you could. One could edit this together. You may not.
I will not. This is the way it goes right now, buddy. Anyways, I'm sorry.
So to Bruce's point, I can restate Bruce's point if you want.
Yes, I would like that.
Okay. Why is there such a large crossover between wargamers to model railroaders? And I think it's typically one direction. I think wargaming as a hobby is, well, it's a different kind of experience. So maybe 10 years ago, I restarted a wargaming podcast with a fellow in New England. And I realized through that experience that there were more curious folk in wargaming than there were in model railroading. And that might seem like an extreme claim, but it was certainly my experience at the time. I think wargaming is a different kind of, it's something that people stop, restart, come back to, what have you. I find it rare to find model railroaders will typically have one or two restarts through their lives, usually around children, work, going to college, these kind of things. Wargamers, I find, are considerably more stop, start through a lifetime. But I think the connection is miniature, it's simulation, it's an aesthetic. To a certain extent, it's an ability to let your imagination run wild in a variety of different directions. And I think in particular, as you say, Bruce, the artistic skill that many wargamers have brings a new aesthetic, I think, to the model railroading hobby. So yes, I'm certainly encouraging of both groups.
Yeah, I happen to mention the ones doing Warhammer, but there's certainly lots of people out there using miniatures for their wargaming, and they're outstanding. We're painting all those miniature figures.
Miniature. That's the hard part.
They're miniature figures. They're hard to paint on those miniature figures.
Yeah.
They're doing tanks and aircraft stuff like that. So it's there's a lot of talent on both sides out there that I think once you start looking, wow.
I think you can learn a lot from other hobbies. I think model railroading traditionally has been very inward looking. And I think certainly as more people come to the hobby, even folks from the electronics and robotics community, I mean, that's that whole explosion with regards to OpenLCB and, the linking with robotics. And so, I mean, I think this is a hobby which is right to be not necessarily blown open, but certainly to have people from a wide variety of different other areas come to it.
Yeah, and you bring a good point about model railroaders kind of not looking around. It's how many times they go in a hobby shop and they're right over to the train area. They're totally ignoring everything that might be of use to them in the ship area of the shop, or armor or aircraft. There's all sorts of things. And when you start putting it all together, there's a vast resources that cross over to all forms of modeling. And you look at some of the work that certainly the ones doing armor and aircraft, things like that, the weathering and the techniques that they're coming up with all the time on the model building. And that our techniques. You know, guys like Ralph Franzetti, Shane Mason, Adam Pinellas. They're picking up these techniques as well for weathering freight cars. And finally, model railroaders are going, oh, really? Well, that's not Floco paint, but it works. So that MIG by ammo works. Vallejo works. Oh, wow. Okay, maybe I'll try it. And
yeah, but
the stuff out there is the techniques are slowly coming, and model railroading is slowly catching up with the rest of them.
I think probably though part of the problem too is it's just model railroad. It's the beauty of this new world with the social media is you're being exposed to these things much easier. Like I was just as guilty as anybody else. Like I went right to the model railroad section, and what I knew was what I knew from model railroading, and the war modeling guys were those guys, and the gamer guys were those guys, and the model car guys were those guys. So I mean, I don't think it's anything that's done. It's just like it's one. And the problem is too, model railroading is a fairly encompassing hobby. It's time consuming, and you don't really have a whole lot of time to be exploring what other people are doing. If you get involved deep into the hobby, you kind of go, holy mackerel, I got all this to do, and you kind of put your head down and start working.
Yeah, particularly if you've got a large layout.
Yeah.
I have a question for Bruce here, because Lionel,
yes.
you've already declared your model railroader. Back when you were 9, this was your exploration of the hobby. How did Bruce? Did the magazines influence you early on with the hobby, or was this
I got interested because my dad, back in the mid '50s, had picked up some old Athearn and Ulrich and that type of equipment. He had a couple locomotive die-cast locomotive kits and a bunch of model railroaders from 54, 55.
Okay, so the magazine
56, and I kind of stumbled across this. Hey, what's this all about, Dad? And that's really set the hook there. And then then finally, getting the first HO. It started with the Lionel, and that was a lot of fun. And then found my dad's stuff and got the first HO Tyco train set for Christmas, and that got me going. And we went to the hobby shop, and oh wow, what? Well, yeah, this magazine's still around, so let's start getting that. And then, he took an interest in how we were working on a 4x8 layout and stuff like that. He had never really got into it again, but he, helped me best he could and let me do what I wanted to and things like that. And but it's because he had originally picked some stuff up for whatever reason back in the mid '50s that caught his eye, model railroading, and fortunately he's not around. I can ask him anymore what first caught his eye, but it's because of him, and what I found in a box in the basement has kind of put me on the path of a lifelong hobby.
Interesting.
For me, it started. My dad, I had the train under the Christmas tree, and then my dad built the 4x8 sheet of plywood, and then he added another one, and it was all 027 or Lionel. Lionel. And, but then when I discovered the October 67 edition of Model Railroader, I got excited about the hobby. But the next thing I knew, my dad and I were building this ginormous layout in our basement. He got into it as well. And, I met all kinds of, I met Lynn Westcott when I was like 14 or something. No, I was like 16 when I met Lynn Westcott. That was very cool. So I mean, the hobbies, I'm not sure why I'm telling that story. This is bad podcasting now, Tom.
I just like exploring areas that are unexplored. I'm an agent provocateur here. I'm trying to get to unexplored stories.
Yeah, I know, but my story didn't really, it was kind of went nowhere other than my dad and I got into the hobby. I feel bad.
That set the hook for your lifelong enjoyment in it.
I'm kind of embarrassed now.
For me, when I first discovered Model Railroader, it was in a Walmart in Las Vegas.
Why are you always in Vegas? What is it going on that you're constantly in Las Vegas?
Let me tell you the story, okay? So I met my wife in 2000. I was working with a few people in the San Francisco Bay Area, but ended up in the UK and came back and proposed to my girlfriend, as she was at the time, who then became my fiancée and then my wife. We then lived in the UK. My wife's family, her sisters live in Las Vegas. So when we were to move back, I said to my wife, there's no technology jobs in Vegas. There's no technology jobs in Vegas. There's no technology jobs in Vegas. And then we ended up in Las Vegas, as married men occasionally do. And I was in Las Vegas for 6 years. It's a large part of it's a very curious part of my life. But, it was based on the fact that I had to return to the US, to the part of the US where my wife's family was. Her parents were at the time. My father-in-law, like you, Lionel, is a medical miracle. He had a degenerative disease which was supposed to kill him. He took some experimental pills, and now he can see and drive, and everything else is wonderful. So we were moving back to be closer to my wife's parents as they were in kind of end of years times, but they both are doing very well. So we moved back initially to be in Vegas. After about 6 years, the company that I still work for gave me an offer that I couldn't refuse, and we moved to, the South San Francisco Bay Area. But yeah, 6 years in Vegas. Anyway, I was in a Walmart. I discovered Model Railroader. I opened this magazine. And I thought, this is the most curiously laid out, just like, what is this mythology in this magazine? And my background with regards to model railroading had all been with regards to people, actually going and seeing people's layouts. My grandfather, my great uncle, people I knew, and this thing, in particular, the mythology, and as you say, these names, and I was probably in my early 30s, I think, when I picked up my first model railroader. So my representation with the hobby historically had always been about people, usually about people that had done, in Australia, you had to scratch build everything. There was no, prototypical trains you could buy off the shelf. So, people that did detailed modeling that were passionate about the hobby. Then when I discovered the magazines, I realized that there's all this mythology. So, when Marty McGurk finally called into Model Rail Radio, I thought, he's a kind of curious character. And, I didn't realize, I know now how big he was and how big you are, Lionel, and all this kind of stuff. But my experience with the hobby was very much not what was in the magazines up until, I probably told you the story. One of my early experiences of the model railroader fraternity was actually being stuck in Bruce Chubb's bathroom while the model railroader guys came through. And I was literally forced into the bathroom while these names kind of paraded around and did all their things. And the anti-story to this is I was at Dave Vaughan's layout. So I went to the O-Scale National a couple of years ago, and Dave Vaughan was giving a presentation about obviously John Armstrong and John Armstrong's layout. And obviously Dave Vaughan has sections of John Armstrong's layout. And ironically here, Stephen, have you ever met Stephen Vaughan?
No. Oh yeah, I have. Yeah.
He's huge.
Yeah,
he's huge. He's a mountain of a man.
He's a one man highlight reel, that boy.
Believe me. So he gets up, like literally we're sitting in this kind of lecture theater. He gets up, turns around, runs up to me and bear hugs me. So anyway, Dave Vaughan's sitting down, no relation to Stephen Vaughan. Dave Vaughan is sitting down up front about to give this presentation. And he just can't believe what he's seeing. Like, who on earth is this? Who on earth are these two freaks that are kind of greeting themselves in this thing? So anyway, I was at Dave Vaughan's layout, and I was there with Tony Costa. And Tony Costa was getting his, is Lionel Strang still in the hobby? Tony Costa. So he's getting his, every time I meet Tony Costa, is Lionel Strang still in the hobby? Anyway, so Tony Costa's there, and I'm there at Dave Vaughan's layout. I just came down with my wife. His wife checks everyone as you go in. We went down. Dave Vaughan stopped talking to Tony Costa, and he showed me, in particular for Michelle's benefit as well, his layout. And that is the real reversal of the situation at Bruce Chubb's layout. And I thought, I have arrived in the model railroading hobby. Someone is giving me existential respect purely through seeing Stephen Vaughan, who is just such a wonderful man, come up, give me a big bear hug, wearing his model rail radio t-shirt and his overalls. I mean, this was just, So, yeah, that was the reverse. But yeah, look, for me, as an outsider looking at this thing, and I spent years at the Scotty Mason show. I flaked on the gentleman's name. The Scotty Mason show. I started listening to the Scotty Mason show and studying it like an anthropology student would study some tribe in the Amazon. This whole thing was very curious to me. The nature of the Franklin and South Manchester, the nature of all these kind of blessed things within the hobby struck me as really very curious as I started. This is before I did model rail radio. So as an outsider coming to this thing, I always found it very, very fascinating, this nature of like how revered the magazines are, particularly in the US. How these names, as you say, Lynn Westcott, John Armstrong, all these people are revered like they're it's almost monastic. I mean, if you look at David Vaughan, he treats John Armstrong's being, his every moment he has spent with John Armstrong is like a monastic thing. It's like a religious experience, which he then goes on and tells other people about. So, yeah, the anthropology of the hobby is always something that's really fascinated me.
Well,
but
the part of that I always go to in what you just said there is my favorite thing, and we've talked about it. I can't talk now. I should not have can I ask you a serious question, Tom?
Certainly.
Bruce, I mean, you'll back me up on this. You know that I'm serious about this question.
Oh, you're serious about everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. Seriously, Tom, do you really think that I'm somebody that should even have a podcast? I think
everyone should have a podcast. My view is that everybody should have a podcast. Everyone gets a podcast.
Yeah, I don't agree.
No, look, I think if anyone, no one has been prouder of the AML phenomena than I have. This is an example of everything I would like to see in people picking up this medium and running with it and making it their own, creating. I mean, you have a long background associated with kind of shock jock radio elements. You talked historically about. No, I mean, I think that's part of your stick, right? So I'm seeing the fellow's hair, but I'm not capturing his name.
Howard Stern.
Howard Stern creates his own mythology. He creates his own world, which means that there's the outside world and then there's the Howard Stern show world. And you have done that perfectly with the AML Network. I mean, you have crafted this thing in a way where I find it absolutely beautiful and fascinating. So, yeah, my view is that your psychology is exactly what podcasting needs. What you've created with the AML Network is such a beautiful orb of your personality, created and empowering and giving the daily check-ins that you guys do. I mean, all these kinds of things, I just look at it and I think, I'm really proud of what you've done with AML. And I wish just by talking, others would see that this thing exists as well. I mean, you've taken the essence of what I did with model rail radio and you've made it your own thing in perfection, Lionel. So hats off to you.
Oh, well, thanks very much. But that'll all be edited out. So I was going to say, the thing about this hobby is my favorite thing, and I've kind of it's kind of been reborn to me, because we recently reinvigorated. Thank you, Bruce. That's why Bruce is here. He is not the mail boy, and he's the language guy that helps me when I get stuck on words. And so recently we interviewed a fellow named David Hyde, who is the lead horn for the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. And he just came up to me in Springfield, and then he sent me I said, send me an email and I'll remember to talk to you. And we had a great conversation, and it reminded me of what is so cool about this hobby. And my other go-to example of this is my buddy Chris Adams, who is a lawyer in the Hartford State Legislature. And what I think is unbelievably cool about this hobby is that people will find each other that normally would never have found each other at all. You could have a guy that's the #1 heart surgeon in the world working in Boston, and a guy in, Austin, Texas, that's a UPS driver, which is a very honorable way to make a living. And if these two guys found a connection through something in the hobby, they both like the Katie, and they start talking about a Jeep 38-2 in the Katie or something. Once these guys find each other through the hobby and a common interest, whether it be a locomotive, a particular branch, or whatever, these people will become lifelong friends. You see it happen over and over and over again, which is what if I had, after 6 years, if I had any desires about the AML Nation, that's my #1 goal, is to continue to create this community where people find each other. The most rewarding thing that happens to me is, and I'm sure it's happened to you numerous times, is when you find out that the two listeners will find each other and they'll become friends, all because you have taken the time to do a podcast. I think that's just the coolest thing going.
Yeah, and something similar is what Gordy had experience when he was doing the week-long NMRA virtual convention. he found out there's another model rotor who literally lives within about 100 meters of him on the island of Bury in Orkney. That this guy was, wait a minute, what? And looked him up and dropped him a line and said, "Hi, I can see your house from here."
Yeah, which is crazy.
Which is wild, you know. And then if it wasn't for Gordy doing that, they probably would have never met. Even though they live 100 meters apart.
And my favorite story like that is my secretary Barb, about 3-4 years ago, was out doing some campaigning for a local election, councilman for a local election. And she walks up to this door. She lives in the country, walks up to the door, knocks on the door, says, "I'm here campaigning for such and such." And the guy goes, "You're Barb." And she goes, "Yeah, have we met?" And he goes, "No, I know you from the podcast, the Modeler's Life podcast, because I talk about her all the time." And so it was just like, how cool is that? Some guy that lives, 3 miles away is listening to the podcast, and he ends up knowing. It's just that kind of stuff just blows you away. And it makes it very rewarding for doing it.
Jim Gifford traveled the Northern Hemisphere meeting people. More than 100 people he met, including, I think, you both.
Yeah, we met him.
Right? Jim Gifford, basically, whenever I look at a blue... And I see Jim whenever I can when I'm back in Australia. He is someone who has understood this podcast. And I wish Jim would... Look, so many people, Kaylee Zhang as well, so many people could create their own podcast. Jim Lincoln, I think, is in the process of trying to do it. But also, I mean, all the guys that you've got, if half a dozen of them created their own podcasts and went off in their own directions. But let's return to Jim Gifford. He met hundreds of people. He went round and literally traveled, 2 continents, meeting listeners and participants.
Yeah.
Just stunning.
It is stunning. There's people all over the world I'm going to meet. But could you stop encouraging my regulars to go off and do their own thing, or else I'm going to be left sitting here by myself. And that
will never happen, Lionel.
That will never happen. As my friend David Stark very plainly puts, when I'm talking by myself doing an intro or something, it's just about the heart. It's worse than listening to fingernails on a chalkboard. So, okay, 11 years. Are you still as enthusiastic as you were? You said it sounded like you were earlier when you said you're always kind of got a buzz after a podcast.
Yeah, I think. Look, I mean, my relationship to Model Rail Radio has changed. I mean, like anything, I've been married 18 odd years now, 19 years.
Careful.
I mean, I know that these things, 18 and a half. I know these things, change over time, but my relationship to the podcast is really more now about all the people that I've met, and, it's a different thing now than it was. But it's the notion that conversation, that words, and the passion in people's voices can convey emotion to a wide variety of folk and can encourage them to also participate.
Yeah.
I mean, that as an abstract idea is really very curious, but it's what it is. So, I don't know. I mean, as you well know, I started this thing as an experiment. We used to joke about this. But I used to do a podcast that was similar about something completely different. That was kind of winding itself up. I thought, what area? I could do a wargaming podcast. I could do podcasts about history, social theory, a few other things. What area should I explore? There are only 2 Model Railroad podcasts? This doesn't make any sense. So Model Rail Radio was born. It was a monologue for 2 shows. Chris Abbott called in, Salt of the Earth Man. We talked. Then your friend Clark Kooning called in. Then obviously, Bruce called in. Then you called in, and
Yeah.
But yeah, just by talking.
Yeah.
Now you're coming up approaching show 200, and you're thinking 12 hours. How do you envision the 12 hours going? It's going to be like a big 12-hour long. Everybody calling.
Let me jump in here. I think I know the answer to this one. 11 hours of me and an hour of everybody else.
Possibly. I remember when you called into show 100 and we're kind of instigator. It was kind of interesting when you called it.
I know, that's actually.
Well, we had whatever. We did have a show. We did the Great Takeover.
Yeah, we did the Great Takeover on. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
But
anyway, let me answer your question. The plan is I'll probably start at maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 a.m. and I'll finish at 9, 10:30. I'll take periodic breaks. I'll do as you say, leave it open for people to come in and talk. The one thing about show 100, show 150, and 200 is I won't do any editing. I'll just clean it up a little bit, but I'll just put it out as is. And that degree of freedom and intimacy, I think, is something that I enjoy about the big shows. That we just record people call in, you get all the ums, the ahs, the detritus that I normally clean up. And yeah, I think that's the format it'll be.
I'm very concerned about the amount of effort you put into the editing. I'm very concerned that you're...
I know you are.
I'm very concerned about that because I'm basically a lazy person. So I'm constantly looking for shortcuts in anything. And so, I mean, I've got my editing down and streamlined fairly. And I think I need to insist on some editing changes on your part, or I'm worried you're going to burn yourself out, but it's been 11 years. So the only thing I was going to say, that the interesting, you should say how over the 11 years, it's like a marriage. It changes your everything changes, your thoughts for the future. You have some past to look at. So your direction might change. But for me, when I started out with the podcast, what I was mostly concerned about was listening to the sound of my own voice. And 6 years later, the thing that I'm the most concerned about is listening to the sound of my own voice. So nothing changed for me. It's still pretty much the same.
Intriguing.
Very good.
Okay, here's a question, Tom. What doing it live like you do, but albeit edited after, what's the biggest challenge for people calling in into your format that you see using? Well, Skype can be swirly at times. You're still on Skype, right?
I'm still on Skype, yes.
Okay,
I think...
now you made the guy feel bad. No,
it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it.
Skype is known to have issues. But what's the biggest challenge from your end to have these people calling in like they do?
Well, I think initially it's always listeners are afraid. I think that always strikes me as really strange. But a number of first-time listeners have said to me, particularly after their audio has come out, they have an immense sense of relief. I mean, that's one of the things about editing that I really find very important is I want to make people sound better. And I want to basically edit the audio so people sound kind of crisper, and so they don't feel bad about audio or, brain farts or all the other things that basically, are omnipresent when people participate in anything that's live. And for me personally... Kind of like
normal life for AML, though.
Yeah.
The quality of the audio is always... What I found particularly fascinating is... So we've had a couple of callers... I probably shouldn't say that. I'll say it out loud. We've had a couple of callers that have called in after not being on the show for 4 or 5 years. Their audio is just as bad as when they called in 4 or 5 years ago. So it's just like, okay, how do I frame this? It's just really nice to have the chance to chat with them. Their audio is bad. I'm going to have to do quite a bit of work in post. Some people, I used to put out videos, I still do occasionally, of editing the shows. And look here, Mike Slater is a saint. But I put in a lot of editing for a variety of the regulars. And when I put out Mike Slater's video of me editing Mike Slater, he could not believe the amount of time and effort I put into just editing him. But I mean, the same is true for a lot of the regulars. The ones that are medical professionals, like doctors and stuff, to a lesser extent, the lawyers, obviously Chris Adams is a good one. People that have to speak for their profession in very controlled manners tend to be better callers in general. And I think Seth Gartner, who you both know as well, it's just amazing. You ask Seth Gartner a question, he pauses, and he gives a concise, erudite answer every time. And after him doing this for about 5 years, I said, Seth, I've got to know, what do you do professionally? Oh, he's a trauma surgeon. He's not anymore. He's retired. But he's a trauma surgeon. So he has to tell people, relatives, all kinds of horrific news. And the thoughtfulness in his presentation is just amazing. But that being said, a number of our regulars, I love having them on anyway, irrespective of, I have to take a deep breath before I start an edit. I know that getting out the best quality audio is really important. The fear people have for calling into Model Rail Radio, obviously I can't understand it. But, people like Speedy, I'd love to have Speedy on Model Rail Radio. But he's like, no. There are so many people who I'd love to have on the podcast that just haven't called in yet. So if any are AML listeners as well, please call into Model Rail Radio.
And ask for Tom.
Most definitely.
Okay, we'll finish with this. Like, what is your, this was only going to be like 30 minutes. You've ruined my whole, and Bruce, did you notice that the more we got into it, the more he projected and he became, at first he was
he was kind of nervous and worried about everything, and then he became comfortable.
Yeah, he was really nervous.
Gordy Robinson, and I just get angry. After Gordy, it's just like,
Well, he has done a ton. Gordy, you ought to be proud of yourself. But we can't leave out those. We can't leave out Martin Jenkins, Brad Anderson, and Reed Muller, and Jordan Kramer helped a bit there too, and other people have helped. All the people that have done clinics for him, and all those people. It's been yeoman's work for sure.
Amen.
So what is would you say has been the one show highlight? What's the one thing you look back on and kind of go, well, that was cool?
We had one show where we had on Dave Ferrari, the late Ryan Anderson. It was ironic because it was a show where my wife had gone on vacation somewhere. I was in Vegas at the time. And I had on Dave Ferrari, the late Ryan Anderson. I think even Scotty Mason called in. And we had basically like the trifecta of podcasters at the time. That was pretty impressive. I've had a number of shows where I've just had a lot of callers on that have been really interesting. But look, any opportunity I have to talk to Dave Ferrari, because I always try to force him out of his comfort zone. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun with Dave Ferrari. But yeah, just a bunch of people. I mean, look, when Gordy called in the first time, when Kaylee Zhang called in the first time, I mean, I was just like, really, Kaylee Zhang is truly brilliant in this hobby. Like, she's one of the few people I think that could really, as Gordy has done, take this hobby in a variety of different directions. And to have the opportunity to talk to a number of these people, I think are generally good shows. But I've got to say that show back, I don't know, probably in the first 20, when I had on Dave Ferrari, Scotty Mason, Ryan Anderson. And Ryan Anderson historically would never call into Model Rail Radio. Like, there was not necessarily a beef between us, but he just really, there was always tension. So to have him call in was actually really nice. It was nice to genuinely have a chance to, chat with him in the Model Rail Radio format.
Well, there's always tension between you and me.
You'll still produce that Canadian Motorcycle Club podcast eventually, Lionel. And until you do that, I'm just going to be on your case.
Well, you know what? You know what really fried my cashews? Well, you know what really fried my cashews was when you tried to get me entangled with that guy from the professor from Australia, and you kept trying to get a cage match going between us, and I'm like, I'm not doing that, because it
was supposed to be Marty McGurk.
Being pummeled with a sack of encyclopedias.
It was Marty McGurk. Marty McGurk started that whole thing about how I was trying to get a cage match with him and the professor, and then somehow he tapped off to you, and then the whole thing is just like. My view is, look, aside from Jim Gifford, I know the professor probably isn't an AML listener, but let's just tell the story anyway. I think the professor is one of the most, not necessarily, he plays a character, but this guy, he's a contemporary of mine, he's roughly my age, I think he might even be a year younger. I get on really well with his wife, I get on really well with him, but he is a character. The person that he plays in podcasts is not the real guy. And until you realize he's playing a character, as you might say, a character that isn't particularly pleasant, but you've got to realize, and look, he realized that too, and that's why he rarely calls in now, because he realized that he was just playing a character and the whole thing became a bit silly. So,
okay. All right. Well, all right. So what about the future for the Model Rail Radio?
Look, I can't stop this thing. It's interesting, actually, because there are reasons in the future where I may have to put down the mic for some period of time. And I'd like Mike Slater to pick it up and do it in my absence, be it for a year or two or what have you. But then again, there are half a dozen people which I think would also be really... I mean, I'm not sure if you've heard the guys in Kent that I have on periodically, and they're friends that I've made in the hobby as well. They're absolutely fascinating.
Who's this?
Martin Coombs, Simon Hill, they've got a bunch of other people that are part of it. They're very big on so the UK has a bunch of magazines that you never hear about outside of the UK. But they have their own little culture thing. This is really offensive here. They have their own culture, which within the hobby is really fascinating. And I think cross-pollination between Australia, the US, the UK, European modelers. I mean, really, that's something I'd love to see with Model Rail Radio. But my view is that if I need to hang up the mic for a few, an amount of time in the future, we've got Mike Slater, we've got the guys in the UK, we've got the posse in Australia. There are a bunch of people who will carry on Model Rail Radio, even if I can't be in front of Mike for any period of time. That's right, we're talking federal charges, people. That's why I won't be So, ladies and gentlemen, my view is that model rail radio could continue in my absence. The essence of it is, as you say, the open mic, the open forum, the friendliness, the just general, camaraderie of the hobby, which I think you've been able to distill perfectly with regards to AML as well.
So you're kind of talking like model rail radio live from Folsom Prison?
Yeah, something like that. Guantanamo. Cuban model rail radio, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, well, he's going to the big house. He's going to the big house.
Amen.
Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor?
There you go. Why don't you, why don't you both you guys talk at the same time? Bruce, you said Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor, and what did you say?
Known as the big house.
It is. And what did you say, Tom? I apologize. I apologize for my friend Bruce here who stepped all over there.
I don't know. I was just thinking about, I've been to, I think, the big house, and I don't know, like everything associated with Midwestern sports, it was, an experience.
All right. So the future is you might hand the mic off to Mike Slater.
Or others, or potentially lots of people.
Okay, and I noticed I wasn't on the short list. Did you notice that, Bruce?
I did take note of that, but he figured you're too busy doing this other wildly popular podcast.
You're too big. You're way too expensive. I can't get you.
Well,
my budget wouldn't extend. I might try to get Bruce now.
Well, come on,
because I could certainly make him an offer.
Hey, come on, he's quit trying to take everybody. It's like
you know what they say, Tom. How you can keep him on the farm once you've seen the big city lights, right?
Amen.
All right, so the future is you might hand it, but do you foresee it going on? Like for me, I don't really foresee me stopping because I have no reason to stop, and again, I still love the sound of my own voice. So. Which, by the way, when I said that, I was really hoping for a bit of a chuckle from both of you guys, and I got nothing. It was like silence. It was crickets.
You can edit that in.
Yeah, I'll edit in crickets.
Edit in crickets or a laugh track.
I think we just chuckled over each other and cancelled out.
Okay.
Okay, I got a quick question for you, Tom. A while back,
fair enough.
This would be a number of years back. At one time, you were sort of building some modules, if I recall. Is anything come of those, or are they kind of
I moved to the Bay Area. Yes. I moved to the Bay Area, and the modules didn't move quite as nicely as I was able to move. And I did a de-skinning video, I think, before. So no, we haven't talked about this, but I'm not a model railroader. I mean, not officially anyway. So I basically, the last layouts I built were all in Vegas. I've got some 2-rail O-scale here. Which I'm threatening to, potentially take out. I've got a bunch of Markland as well. I've got a bunch of early Second World War era German locomotives.
Oh, nice.
Which were given to me by, not given to me, I paid for them. But one of the kids, we used to have these 2 kids from Chicago that would call in, and these guys were just fiends. These were just fiends. Anyway, one of them, for whatever reason, got his hands on some, like I say, early Second World War German Markland, they're modern trains, but based on those. And I'm just like, these things are unbelievable. Anyway, so some money exchange fans, he sent them over. I'm always threatening to potentially. But I realize actually that Mike O'Dorney, I'm not sure if he's part of the AML network, but yes, he is. He always talks about you guys. Mike O'Dorney builds Markland modules. So I probably need to, I'm sending boxes of stuff. I probably need to send him a box or 2 of cash and see if he can build me a Markland module. Because, that would be wonderful. To answer your question, no.
You think the hobby's growing or shrinking?
Oh, look. Well, it's interesting because my perspective on this has been based on my experience. All I can talk about is my experience. I think the hobby is growing in areas. Just talk about the number of lasers and 3D printers and what kind of hobby? This isn't the hobby that was there a decade ago.
Yeah, that's a great. Wow, I love that. It only took 1 hour and 23 minutes, but we finally got a nugget of wisdom out of him. Holy mackerel. I love that. This isn't the hobby it was 10 years ago. And probably, Tom, based on your expertise, and Bruce, I'm very interested in your opinion, too. I love that, Tom. That is awesome. I would say that many, many times during the history of the hobby, you could say this isn't the hobby it was 10 years ago. But over the last 10 years... I think it has changed, and the things that have happened in the last 10 years far outstrip or outweigh or what would I say? So help me out. See, that's the problem, Tom, with me having a podcast is I only know 27 words. I'm very, very, very similar to certain people who are in charge of certain countries.
It's the ever-evolving technology.
Yeah.
Make-up words.
Yeah,
make-up words, Lionel.
Yeah. Okay. But anyways, it's like I don't think the hobby's ever, this last 10 years of the hobby, I think it's super grown. It's not the hobby it was 10 years ago. I can't believe it took you an hour and 23 minutes to come up with something valuable.
I'm sorry. I mean, this is the problem with the NMRA board, right? They don't see the past 10 years.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Tom, I want to formally apologize to you because there was a stretch there where I really don't feel like I gave you your due. And I want to formally apologize on the air because you've always been there for me whenever I had a problem. And you really got me all cranked up there recently when you made that video about editing. And you did the one there was about truncate silence, and I just about went crazy. I saved about 5 minutes on every podcast, and I just want to say I did the same as you. I've been helping Tim Harrison quite a bit in the last little while, and I'm going to get him on here talking about his podcast.
Definitely.
So I feel as though I should formally apologize to you on the air because I feel like there's a stretch where I didn't give you your due, and I think but that's just me. That's the way I am.
Well, I said this before. I probably need to say it again. Early on, there was a period of time where I didn't trust Patreon. I think this was the point where our friendship might have distanced ourselves. I had a series of problems with Patreon early on, completely independent. You came to Patreon. I wanted to say, firstly, that everything I'd said historically about Patreon fixed itself. One of the most brilliant engineers I've had the opportunity to work with came from Patreon before she arrived with the company I work for. She's since moved on to other greater things. But Patreon as a technology, you really championed early. I was a little skeptical of it, but I think now it's unbelievably worthwhile. And you have shown this as a trailblazer. So my personal feeling is our friendship might have soured through the early discussions about Patreon. It was not in any way about your adoption of Patreon. It was associated with my bad experiences with Patreon. It has become clearly the platform of choice for doing the stuff that you do. And I also, I don't have a Patreon for the stuff that I do, but more power to people that do such as yourself, because it enables you to craft content for a very particular kind of user. And I think that's probably, if I can be candid, that might have been where our friendship soured completely and utterly unnecessarily, might I add, because I certainly wasn't in any way mentioning your use of Patreon at the time. There's problems that I'd seen with the platform up until that point. But now I think it's an amazing thing, and obviously your use of it, hats off. More power to you.
Yeah. Now, just so, because we're being completely honest with the viewers, and Bruce, we try to be as transparent as we can here at the old AML Network, right? Absolutely. If I don't get that check for my last appearance on Model Rail Radio, we could run into problems again.
Bitcoin, Lionel, the way of the future. You need Bitcoin.
All right, Bitcoin. What else? I think that's it, Bruce?
I think we've had a great conversation with Tom. It's good to get caught up and see what he's done and get his thoughts on things. So, yes.
I don't think I'm going to do this as an episode. I think I'm just going to do this on the off Mondays on the free channel so everybody can hear it and hear us talking about Gordy. I believe Tom will have to be prepared for the end, and that's probably going to be endless amounts of fun, I believe. So, Bruce, could you give out our email address?
Yes, our email address, if you want to send us your thoughts and comments on anything you hear or see on AML network-related activities, Modeler's Life, modelers with one L, modelerslife@gmail.com.
And we have a webpage, modelerslife.com, and if you go there, you'll find out all kinds of cool stuff, see upcoming episodes and episodes that have recently occurred, and very near the top of the page, there's a picture of the moderately agitated mailboy in a particularly agitated state. And if you just click right on that picture, you automatically can send us an email, which will make it even easier for you. And also, there's a little ad there for Ron's Trains and Things. That's who you should get on your show there, Tom. Ron's Trains and Things, who is our official videographer of the AML Network. All of our how-to videos are over there on his channel, and he's making those for us. And also, we have Patreon, which Tom just spoke of. So you get 4 free episodes a month. But if you want some real down-home fun, Kaylee Zhang refers to it as the Antics channel. Then we answer viewer mail, and we talk about the posts on the AML, fans of the AML page, and just have all kinds of fun over there. So you should go over there for $5 a month, 16 cents a day. Dave Abelese and Rich Wisniewski, you two guys should be over there. I think that's it. Did we cover everything, Bruce?
I think so.
So, Tom, now right at the very end of the show, you're going to have the opportunity to express a personal opinion. So you need to be ready. So remember, a Modeler's Life podcast is considered marginally adequate by 6 out of 10. See, Bruce, I don't think he was ready.
I was ready.
Oh, there was an awful big guy. No, I don't. We're gonna. Bruce, are you still there? Did you leave? He's on mute. Bruce is on mute now.
No, I was just. You just set him right up with a nice, easy one down the middle, and he whiffed.
Yeah, I know. It's just like the guy that only golfs once a year, and he completely missed the tee shot. All right, we're going to give you another shot at this, Tom, and now you're more. You're a little more prepared.
Okay.
So remember, a Modeler's Life podcast is considered marginally adequate by 6 out of 10
NMRA directive.
Mr. Strang's wardrobe provided by The Dashing Camper. For all your fashion and tent repair needs, trust The Dashing Camper.
It's another Lincoln Homer.
See, now that was a good one.
That's a beauty.
That's a sweet one. Now that one you hit right out of you. That one
that one deep center, gone all
that
the
was
way.
Gone right off the crack of the bat. That one was gone
over the green monster in left field at Fenway.
450 feet dead center. Never even burped.
Exit velocity 115 miles an hour.
Yeah. You smacked the snot out of that one, Tom.